All right, looks like we're live. Welcome everyone to the Flux development meeting. We have a couple of things on the agenda, but first I thought we have some people who are new on the call. Maybe you want to quickly introduce yourselves so we know who's who.
Justin, that's your cue.
Okay. I'm Justin. I work at Mesosphere. I recently left Cloudflare. And I've been contributing off and on to Flux. Yeah.
Cool. Fons, I saw you also just joined.
Yeah, I have forgotten about the time of the meeting. Sorry about that.
No problem. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yep. My name's Alfonso Acosta, and I've been, well, how should I say this? I was working for Weaveworks for a while, and after a break of a year and something, I'm back working for Weaveworks, specifically in Flux. I'm not super familiar with all the Flux details yet. I started working on it at the end of 2018. But I'm really excited about the project, particularly about the popularity it's getting. I'm really impressed. There's a lot of users and a lot of pull requests and contributions, and generally the vibe is pretty good too, right? There's a lot of users, but most people are friendly and ask questions politely, which I really appreciate.
And answer questions politely as well, which is really lovely to see.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool, all right, I think James may be back in a bit. And we have Tamo as well. Hi, Tamo.
Hello.
Hey. Daniel, what's next?
Yes. So first of all, I thought we had a couple of actions in the last meeting, so I thought we'll review them first. The first one was that Michael and I put together a straw man for a Helm Operator 1.0 themed release. In the end, we pulled in quite a few more people. I think we're going to review that in the Flux roadmap agenda item next. So what else did we have? Integration tests that we see what's still missing. We're also going to discuss it later on. And the other one was about the meeting time. So we have a meeting now, and we also set up the mailing list. Yeah, if you're not on the Flux Dev mailing list yet, we put it up. If you just go to the Flux GitHub page, it will show you how to sign up. That's where it's not going to replace Slack or anything, but that's where we want to have more structured and longer discussions. So please sign up for that. All right. Shall we take a look at the Flux roadmap?
Yeah, cool. So I made some notes. So, just to be clear, we don't have a published roadmap at present, so we're just sort of embarking on a reasonably relaxed process of trying to compile something that we can sort of make a reasonably confident commitment to. So I made some brief notes about some sort of reasonably big ticket items that I think are going to land fairly soon, and then some things which are maybe a bit more experimental or that haven't been started yet. And then I think we could have a wee bit of discussion and maybe time box that about things that people would like to see. Since I mean those do get discussed on HashFlux, but there's also a lot of other discussions, so sometimes they get a bit lost in that. So stuff that is hopefully landing pretty soon. So there's been some renewed work on signing commits and verifying, so kind of two halves of having sort of fully verified Git commits, which Hida's has been working on, and I think that is going fairly well. We've landed one half of that, the first bit. Is that right, Hida?
What's done is basically signing everything. So the sync tag gets signed now, and all commits get signed. What's missing is basically the verification part when running updates from Git. But I think that's only like 25% of the whole feature, basically. So we're more than half done.
Cool.
The verification part is the easiest bit.
Right.
Although it's tricky from the backwards compatibility point of view, I guess, right?
No, because it's behind the flag. So if you don't enable the flag, everything runs like it did in the past, basically. And when you enable the flag, it starts validating, but it only starts validating from the first commit it sees after enabling the flag. So it should basically be fine when you turn it on after a while.
All right.
You only have to make sure that you sign your commits after you turn on the flag, but that's...
All right, good. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation.
No problem.
We're now two different conversations off beam. Okay, so the next thing is garbage collection of resources, which was contributed originally by someone who's not here a bit, sort of was at one point a keen contributor, and we've been working fairly intensely on that. So, and I'm hoping that that's in a pretty good state as of right now. Daniel asked, are we going to turn on verification by default? Probably not. We may end up going back and forth a bit on the user experience, because we may find it's going from switched off to switched on might be too much of a jump for people, and something like that. We'll just have to find that out, but probably not by default. Because it requires, one reason is it requires people to take steps themselves in GitHub and in their own, local processes. So garbage collection of resources, to go back to that, hopefully soon, which will, I think, that'll make it much, much closer to what people think of when you say Flux reflects the state in Git into the cluster. Because almost everyone takes that and thinks, oh, right, so exactly what's in Git should be what's in the cluster, which is an absolutely fair and reasonable assumption. And we'll get much closer to that. And maybe sort of arguably as close as you want to get, because I think you do often want exceptions to that rule. Another thing that may land soon, or will be worked on after the garbage collection at least, is to extend. So we have an experimental feature that I think, Justin, you contributed originally, I may be wrong, which is about allowing certain namespaces. Yeah, Justin's nodding. And we were going to basically graduate that from experimental to sort of full feature by making it extend to everything, which is harder than it sounds, even when you take into account that it's harder than it sounds. But Fons has been working on that, and I think we'll go back to that. So we should sort of round that out, in the next few weeks, maybe.
Yeah, I'll work on that as soon as we merge the garbage collection stuff, because there were interdependencies in the code, and we want to get the garbage collection out first.
Yeah, we figured out that there was at least one big overlap, which was about how to assign namespaces to things, and that it was better to do those things serially rather than in parallel. So those are some of the big things that could be landing soon, and I think in some sense, they all have the flavor of kind of living up to the whole syncing with Git story of Flux, which is good. I think it's good to do one job and just to do it better and better. Things that are slightly further out, so actively being worked on but have been discussed at length and mooted. We had talked about having a read-only mode, so basically sync only, don't do any automated stuff, don't write a sync tag, which is sort of an accidental thing anyway. Even though in theory you can sort of effectively have a read-only mode, I think people want the assurance of being able to say, one, provide credentials that only give you a read-only view into the Git repo, and two, be able to explicitly say, I only expect you to read from the Git repo. So that'll kind of bring with it some minor sort of design changes, but only good ones, I think. And another thing on the further out list, we have been talking some more about being able to integrate sort of configuration generators into Flux. It's not always realistic to expect people to put everything in kind of flat YAML files. And more, I think the practice, but we're already excluding people that want to use, say, Sonnet or Customize or other means of generating stuff. And more the practice is that people will probably use that stuff. So Fons has been working on a proof of concept, or actually writing a design out and then going on to working on a proof of concept for integrating Customize into Flux. So we at least have some idea of how you integrate this configuration generator steps. And I think that to me is sort of on the border of that, applying stuff in Git to the cluster story, but arguably it's included. And also it looks like Customize is going to be merged into the standard tooling for Kubernetes. So at that point, it'll be more a question of why don't you do it rather than, hey, why don't we do it? So yeah, it'll be kind of important to have something to say about that, I think, fairly shortly. So that is the end of my preview. And I now invite comments on, I guess, those things and what other people might expect to see in the next small number of months, say. Justin, you made an interesting post to the dev list about writing changes back to Git. How much do you think that kind of fits how much do you think you expect that to be part of what Flux does? Or how much out on a limb do you think you're going with sort of proposing that sort of behavior?
So initially I wanted to implement it outside of Flux, and you'd run one daemon for syncing from Git and then one for syncing to Git. But I wasn't sure if there was a good way to not have them conflict if they're separate daemons. So if they're the same daemon, it can kind of make the decision at one point whether it's going to push to Git or to Kubernetes. So I think if it were to exist, it would need to exist in Flux. but I don't know if it's like something that other people want or care about. But I think it would make some things easier. So, you know, we do the, like we do pushback to Git when, you know, you update like a deployment and the image updates. But with this model, instead of having, you know, that logic built into Flux, you would just you could deploy like Keel or something that already, you know, does the image tracking, and then it would just update the manifest, and then Flux would say, oh, that's been updated, and push it to Git, and then, you know, that would persist. So, you know, it'd make it a little more composable. It would make, you know, enable some interesting CI/CD workflows, I think. But I don't know. I think it would be a lot of work to integrate into Flux, and I don't know if there's enough interest or not.
Can you? I didn't read what you wrote on the channel. I've been like heads down on development in the past days. Can you like summarize it and maybe mention a few use cases in which you think that could be useful? Because
yeah. So the general overview would be, you could write rules, or there would be some sort of heuristic where Flux would, if you made a change to a resource in Kubernetes, it could commit that change back to the Git repository. So, you know, Flux already does this for Docker images when they get updated. So this would just be a different approach to implementing that feature that's a little more generic. The use case that I had that actually prompted me like thinking about this was I'm trying to work on a backup workflow using the new Volume Snapshot API. And basically the way the Volume Snapshot API works is you create a Volume Snapshot resource, and then the Volume Snapshot controller creates a Volume Snapshot content that references the actual snapshot. And I wanted to be able to back up those two resources. That way, if like my cluster blows up, I can restore them automatically. So I have an operator that automatically creates the snapshots, but then I needed a way to persist those back to Git. So that's my use case. And there would be other ways to achieve that. Like you could just dump them straight to Git with like a cron job or something. But yeah, I was also thinking about if there's a way to integrate that into Flux or not.
All right, but it doesn't sound like something you want to fully automate, or at least not apply to every single resource which appears in the cluster, right?
Yeah, well, so it depends on how well we could write a heuristic for it. If there was a way to like kind of detect like, you know, if this has been applied by kube control, then, you know, commit it back to Git. If it's, you know, then if there's an update in Git, or, you know, the way I'm implementing my proof of concept is they just write rules, and it's like, you know, if it's a deployment and the change is to an annotation, then commit it back to Git. Otherwise, you know, revert the change or whatever.
So I think that there's also a use case which is pretty close, or maybe between what Flux does now and what you're talking about, Justin, which is there are some bits of manifests that we might want to reflect back from the cluster into Git, like if you have a horizontal pod autoscaler running, you might want to sort of checkpoint that and say, just, you know, store it and put this, write this back to Git, so that if I start again from scratch, if I reapply this, then I will, instead of starting from 0, start from roughly where I was when the autoscaler changed it last time. And there's maybe a handful of that kind of attribute. in general, though, it's very difficult not to create feedback loops where things fight each other, or so you would either have to make sure that sort of causality only really flowed one way, which is what Flux does right now. So when it updates an image, it makes the change in Git, and then it applies what's in Git. So stuff always goes sort of upstream from the application, and the application is the last thing, which might work for some of your use cases. I'm not sure. But if it were the case that, for instance, you reflected the snapshots back into Git, and then when you applied them, something else happened and a new one got created or something, then you would have a feedback loop, and obviously that would be problematic. And the other way to avoid feedback loops is to have a fixed point, which is probably pretty difficult to establish because Kubernetes is wild and wonderful, and who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting idea, and I, at some point we'll respond on the mailing list shortly. So hopefully we can.
Yeah, I was hoping to toss
discussion going there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping to toss the idea out there and see if anyone else was interested or had any knee-jerk reactions.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I had one, but I haven't written about it yet.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that it could be used as a way to resolve differences between Git and the cluster. There's a tool called kubedev that I think WeWorks uses internally, and I don't know if it's public. Is it? I'm not sure. It gives you the difference between Git and the cluster, but when there's a difference, you need to think about how to resolve it, right? And if the case is that somebody has made a change directly in the cluster for whatever reason, then you got to go to the cluster and check the difference and consolidate it in Git and to silence the problem, right? So this could be used for that. Although maybe it's a bit too specific, I don't know.
Yeah, if you had a good heuristic for determining whether or not a change should be persisted, then yeah, you could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could specify to Flux cuddle or have a way to present the get asked for the differences in Flux cuddle so that you can decide. My bias on that is provide better tooling to help people resolve those changes, because usually often it will be an accident, an accidental difference, and so you kind of want to almost always involve a human, but just give them a really good efficient way of saying, yes, there was an accident, or no, I really want that, just do it. And almost never to actually try and automatically resolve those things.
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
you just have like a list of known changes, and the operator approves or denies them.
Yeah, you could almost do I think what Alfonso was suggesting was a Flux diff, and it could give you a line-by-line diff, which you could actually patch into your Git repo if that's what you wanted to do, or three-way through a merge or whatever.
Yeah, it would be nice if the diff could, write the dry run over the API, so all the admission controllers will append or modify whatever is in there and ignore that. Like, for example, I don't know, like Istio does it, and so many other controllers, they will add sidecars, init containers, add notations, and all this stuff, right? Hopefully the new dry run API that I think it's beta now in 1.13 will actually give you the diff. So the kubectl diff will run on the API. The API will actually apply all these admission controllers, and you'll get something that resembles what you're running on the cluster. Right? Right now with 1.11, for example, it's impossible to know how will my pod actually look like after I apply. Depending on how many admissions controller you had and what they actually do.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we let the Flux Dev discussion blossom at this point. Let's move on, because we need to make sure we talk about Helm operator, and give James some time to tell us about chocolatey stuff as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. All right, so I guess similar to the roadmap for FluxD, there is also the Helm operator, which hardly ever gets talked about. I mean, is always talked about. So we have a kind of, this is a sort of soft announcement of we'd like to make a Helm operator 1.0 release, and actually this is not news. I think we might even have talked about it last time we had this Village Hall thing. But we have some candidate features or issues now for what could go in a 1.0. Not a final list, of course. One reason for airing it here is to invite comment on it. So let me switch, and I will go through briefly the things that are on the list. Excuse me. So actually, it's a pretty short list, which I think is good. Short lists are good. So one thing is that we should probably bump the API version to V1. That is the Kubernetes CRD API version, which is presently flux.weave.works/v1 beta1. We should bump that to V1, which means being reasonably sure that we've got it right, which I think we can be pretty confident of. Next item was people quite often ask, because they know that you can poke Flux to tell it there's a new commit in Git, but at present you can't do that with the Helm operator, and it's a reasonable expectation that you should be able to. So the next item was to put a hook into the Helm operator so you could poke it and tell it to look at Git rather than waiting for 5 minutes or so for it to discover things for itself. And then the last line item was to give people a way to tell the Helm operator, or actually Flux, how their images and image tags are encoded in their values that they supply in the Helm release doc. So we support a kind of small number of common formats, but nonetheless, there are charts which use a different format, and it would be useful to be able to use those charts with the automation. So that's a fairly modest set of things for 1.0 release. There's sort of the implied thing of it works, and we probably won't change it too much as well, of course, but that's not really a feature, it's just a state. And another thing that would be good to do if we can, which I have committed to at least attempting, is to split the Helm operator code out into its own repo, so it can have its own issues, and then we can have a slightly more controlled release thing where we vendor over the code from Flux and blah, 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 etc. So again, can I invite people to comment on whether they think that's a reasonable list, whether there's any wish list items that didn't appear?
I was wondering if we had thought about what we'll be doing once Helm or Tiller moves to the CRD model that they've been talking about for Helm version 3. I guess at that point, our job would be keeping the charts in sync with Git. But have we thought about how that will change the design at all?
So there's two innovations that I think were talked about with regard to Helm v3. One was to not have a server, so not have Tiller, and just do everything client side. The other was to have a CRD model, as you mentioned, Justin. And I think that particular thing has fallen by the wayside, but I'm speaking as of, I think, December, we last talked to the Helm folks.
Yeah.
Stefan, you probably got your finger on it.
Yeah, so the CRD is most, their future CRD will be representing the release state. Like, what's the actual state of the release? Right now, that state lives in a config map that Tiller manages, and that will move to a CRD and a secret. So values will be kept as secrets, and there will be a CRD representing that release. So it's not actually GitOps, right? So from our point of view, what we have to do when Helm 3 arrives, I think we'll have to just modify the operator to not talk to Tiller anymore and use the Helm 3 client that will bootstrap everything. And instead of querying Tiller, what's the state of the release in the cluster so I can synchronize it, we will just talk to the Kubernetes API and get that custom CRD out of that, right? So in my mind, it will not change much, but how it functions today will not change very much. But of course, you know, vendoring a new Helm package is not going to be something that we can do in a couple of days. I mean, and we also have to ensure compatibility. I don't know, running 2 Helm operators for some time, or I don't know how we'll do that. It all depends if Helm 3 breaks compatibility with Helm 2 or not. If it breaks, we'll have to ensure some kind of compatibility on our own.
Yeah, I think that will probably be the trickiest bit. Yeah. That period when they're both in play, which will last, I'm sure, years.
Yeah. So the Helm organization said that they will patch Helm 2 and maintain it for 3 to 6 months after they release Helm 3. Because there are so many charts out there, there are so many production systems out there that are using Helm, you cannot just expect them to switch on the first day and break everything. So we will have to have the same migration, at least the same migration period.
Maybe they should rename them Helm XP and Helm Vista. just to set the right expectations.
It doesn't sound, but it doesn't sound like that'll affect 1.0.
No, I don't think so. And they're not really on the same schedule. I think Helm v3 has been pushed out.
Yeah.
And even before it had been pushed out, it was sort of due to be in alpha maybe in January. So, but it has been pushed out anyway. So it's alpha in the next couple of months or further on even. So yeah, we have a grace period.
There is an interesting change for us coming into Helm, and I think it will be backported to Helm 2. The fact that you can use Docker registries as Helm repositories. What that means for us is if Flux already knows how to talk to ECR, GCR, whatever, using the Docker config secret, we can use the same Docker config secret to make the Helm operator fetch charts from Docker registry. So we'll see like a unification of, you don't have these Helm repositories, I don't know, sitting somewhere. They will be standardized on a Docker registry. And that's, I think, good news for us, because we already have native support for a couple of popular Docker registries out there. I think now we have support for all of them. We've added Azure recently. So maybe that will be something that will work on Helm operator 1.1 or whatever. I think it's a great addition to the Helm ecosystem, the fact that you can use the Docker registry and not come up with something else.
Cool. All right. That reminded me of something, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes. Apparently, Key.io has got some sort of app storage thing that I think 2 people have asked about, maybe. But and the reason I bring that up is it's similar to using Docker images for, it's a different API.
What is it? Key.io what?
So Key.io or Quay.io a while back decided they wanted to sort of be this unified app repository. So not just images, container images, but Helm charts and maybe other things. So they published an API, which they apparently still support, and 1 person uses. And that person is also a Flux user and asked us why we didn't support that API. I mean, the answer was I had no idea it existed. But anyway.
So I've looked into it. It's really weird. They have some kind of Helm plugin that does authentication in their own way. The URLs are different. The whole API is different. So you have to use their own CLI. I would not bother. Docker registries will come, so we'll have a unified way. I don't think. Implement
that'll be better for you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's give James some time before we run out of it. James, do you want to talk a bit about Chocolatey? Cool. 1 second.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute my computer there. Forgot how to do it. So, hello, room. It's nice to meet all of you all. This is the first time I got to meet you guys face to face. First of all, I want to apologize for being so mysterious as of late regarding the contribution that I'm trying to make to the project here. If you don't know, I'm the guy who responded to an issue about creating a Chocolatey package install for the Flux Control command line tool. So first off, in all honesty, I've had very little time to devote any additional development effort here. My entire 2019 year has really picked up for me at my day job. So it's looking rather dismal. What I have accomplished up to this point, though, is that I figured out how to write the Chocolatey package, and I had uploaded a package to install Flux Control to chocolatey.org. Now, ideally, we would want to have the entire package construction and testing be owned by the Weaveworks code line itself. That way we could respond to releases a lot faster and automate the release of the new Chocolatey package when a new Flux Control is released. The part that I've been struggling with is there's a lot of additional complexity that's involved with testing Chocolatey packages. Typically it involves the establishment or provisioning of a Windows virtual machine, and then you would run a Choco install, and then you would verify that your package installs and uninstalls correctly, and maybe test it for any viruses or whatever additional kind of unit system tests you wanted to run at that part. So the part that I'm struggling with is in order to incorporate that all into the code line, there's the virtual machine itself for the test environment. You could utilize a Unix KVM or a Windows-based machine running like a Hyper-V to run your test environment. And then there's also the construction of your Windows virtual machine that you would want to have a place where you can save the virtual machine and a snapshot so that when you run a test, you can revert that snapshot to refresh your test environment back to its initial state. So there's a lot of additional complexity there. There is a ways to automate all of that, but my question to the community is whether or not that's appropriate for the Weaveworks code line, or how would you want to incorporate that? But also, I would add with that, the Chocolatey community does this same validation and verification themselves. Whenever you upload a new package, they'll run an automated install and a virus scan on that package. And so another option would be to defer that step off to chocolatey.org itself.
James, do you know if we can replicate the whole validation process on AppWare?
So
I've been using that for a long time, doing continuous integration on .NET Framework and stuff.
Right, I'll send you a link on the chat here. So Chocolatey just released a test environment code line that allows you to replicate some of the tests that they're doing. I noticed that it seems to be notably missing the total virus antivirus scan that they seem to run. But it is a good place to start that can get you that far. And then of course the package, the package source is hosted on my GitHub site, if you wanted to. That's located here.
Yeah, from what I've seen, they use Vagrant, so that's not an option for us. We need some kind of free SaaS that works for open source projects.
Yeah,
if it doesn't work on AppWare, I don't think we'll build our own Vagrant CI managed by Weaver.
I doubt it won't work on AppWare. I've used it for a private project, which was very, very Windows specific, and it worked really well. And it's free. I think we get one VM at a time, like one execution at a time for open source projects. So it's free. And it's just like any other CI system, like Circle CI or Travis or whatever. It just executes on Windows, and they have like pre-made virtual machines of all sorts. I've actually been building Chocolatey packages for a private project, or maybe not building them, but at least making use of Chocolatey. So I think that should work.
Fons, would you be prepared to sort of help James out with onboarding the Chocolatey build, or at least the CI bit of it?
Sure.
Because I mean, we build binaries, so this is more a case of kind of running a smoke test and whatever packaging tests, and then incorporating the packaging bit into the main repo. Is that a fair summary, James?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for. Definitely, lots of people are coming along and with questions about how to use Flux with Azure, and we've built in some Azure and had some contributions to make it work with Azure. So clearly, there is quite an appetite for Windows-oriented or Microsoft-oriented use of Flux. So it seems like an open door to be pushing against, if that's the phrase. Yeah, or at least.
I'm pretty confident it's not all that hard to do. I mean, if you can do it in a local machine, doing it in AppWare is really easy. You just provide whatever script you're using, PowerShell, whatnot, and it will be run on AppWare. And it has all sorts of stuff to collect artifacts and whatnot. So it should be easy, I think.
Right.
James, you're in the Slack, aren't you? You're a member of the #Flux and
I am. Yep,
yeah,
I
cool. All right, so we can sort of coordinate there.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah, if that doesn't work, you could also ask on the mailing list. Maybe some of the Azure folks can also help out there or listening there.
True.
And thanks a lot for your work on this.
Yeah.
No problem.
We had
Is there a need for?
Go
on. I was going to ask if there's a need for Flux itself on Windows. Like if people are running Windows only clusters and want to use Flux.
You mean Flux D, the daemon?
Yeah.
Is it possible to run Kubernetes on Windows or
using Docker for desktop? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
No, that's a VM.
I don't know
that's
if anyone...
a Linux VM.
Oh,
Azure has Windows nodes, but Azure deploys the master nodes as Linux VMs, and it also exposes a node pool for Linux. So if you want to run Flux to deploy Windows containers, you can do it, and Azure will deploy the Flux itself on a Linux node. So I don't think there's much of a need there. What I've seen on, it came up a couple of times on Git and also on Slack, the need for Flux to run on ARM. For example, I don't know, OpenFast, for example, runs on any kind of ARM. It's not that hard to compile it. The problem is you need a special CI system to build all this stuff on ARM. So one guy suggested that we were to just buy a bunch of Raspberry Pis and build our own CI system. That's out of the question, but there are services like, there are cloud services that offer ARM servers that we could rent and build there with Drone, IO.
I think, yeah, I was going to say Drone supports ARM now for open source projects too. They have a hosted solution already.
Yeah. AWS supports ARM64 workloads as well.
Yes, it does. Yeah, of course. It's ARM64, yeah. The Drone IO cloud service. I've tried it. Yeah, you can build things on ARM and ARM64 with Drone IO. It's just work to be done on the Flux repo to have all these build profiles for Windows, for ARM, for ARM64, for Linux, and so on. So yeah, it's a lot of CI work, so to speak.
Yep.
Has Daniel gone away, or is it just his? No, he's sort of okay, still there. Daniel, so we're coming up to 6. Is there anything crucial that we need to get through before we all disappear?
Yes, I thought, yeah, I'm going to, I told Michael earlier, I'm going to label all the Helm Op 1.0 issues, and I think it would be good to bring this up on the mailing list again so people can also leave some comment there, and we can also let people know when they should, start testing this. So we want to get some feedback before the 1.0 release. The other thing was integration tests, next steps. That was one of the things, one of the PRs which have been sitting around, and I think we wanted to figure out like where, what still needs to be done and where we might need help.
Yes. So I don't have the most up-to-date idea of where that got to, but my memory is that, my recollection is that we ran into the difficulty of essentially running any kind of integration test that involves Kubernetes in an already containerized environment. So there we had some discussion at some point about running Docker and Docker, or Kubernetes and Docker, and I don't think we found a solution, but it may yet be possible to be able to run Minikube, for instance, in Circle CI, given some hacks or something.
Last weekend, I built end-to-end testing for Flagger with Kubernetes kind and Circle CI. What it does, I create a Kubernetes cluster on CircleCI, I install Istio, Prometheus, and tons of things, and I run an end-to-end test for canary deployments, and it takes like 10 minutes. Doing the same thing for a Flux should be way easier because it doesn't need all this huge infrastructure around it. It only needs a Git server. We have some very small Git servers around, and that's about it, right?
Oh, cool. All right, that's pretty good evidence that it's possible then.
Yeah.
I actually do an end-to-end test of Flux in Flux Operator in Drone using LocalCube. But,
okay.
So yeah.
So we have two possibilities there. Excellent.
I would definitely go the kind route nowadays.
Cool.
Yeah,
all right, so that's worth a try. That could be.
CircleCI has a lot of memory somehow, so you can just run Kubernetes there with 2 GB of RAM, and it just works. So we use CircleCI. It's not that hard to add this new infrastructure on top of what we already have. Switching to Drone would be nice, but it's such a huge work. I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that.
Cool. All right. So it seems like it would be reasonable to pick that work up again if we can. Let's figure out how we can do that. Not now.
Shall we also move that to the mailing list and then tease apart what still needs doing and who can help with what?
All right. I have to commute in, so I gotta go.
Oh, cool.
All right.
No worries. All right.
Bye, Justin.
Justin, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, well, let's just discuss it in Slack.
Okay.
Yeah. Stefan, do you mind quickly when you remember, just making a post suggesting that we could reattempt using kind?
Yeah.
Docker? Awesome.
Yeah, I have most of the scripts. I have most of the scripts that we could definitely reuse to spin up everything. What we need to build is what kind of tests we want to do. For Flagger, it's very easy because it has a status CRD, and I'm just pulling that status, and when the status, everything is great. We can do the same for Helm operator. We have a CRD status there, but for Flux, I think it's more.
Well, so it's a shame Nick isn't here because he wrote a whole bunch of scaffolding for the test. So that's the bit we do actually have.
Nice.
Or at least a start of. Yeah.
That's great.
It's just a case of putting the new idea of how to run it together with the old bits. And, yeah.
Great.
Cool. Daniel, do we need to decide a next meeting, or should we?
Yeah, I think it would be good to at least have an idea of how often we want to meet. So last time was November, end of November. So maybe, I don't know.
Sooner than that.
Yes.
Once per month, at least, I would say.
Yeah.
Once per month is not too bad.
Yes. Okay, I'll plan that then, and then we can see if we're going to need more meetings. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.
Any last words? Any things we didn't talk about yet?
Not from me.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Pleasure meeting you all.
Yes.
You too, James.
Same here. Thank you.
Likewise.
Take care.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.